My name's Kevin, and I thought I had it all. A beautiful wife named Emily, 2 great kids, and a cozy home in suburban Ohio. Our little town is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and secrets are hard to keep. But I guess Emily found a way. We met in college and quickly became inseparable. Emily was a force of nature, always the life of the party with her infectious laughter and captivating stories. I was the quieter type, more content with a good book or a night in. But somehow, we balanced each other out perfectly. After graduation, we got married and bought a house with a white picket fence, thinking we'd live our version of the American dream. Emily pursued a career in marketing and quickly climbed the corporate ladder. Her job demanded long hours and frequent travel, but I was proud of her accomplishments. Meanwhile, I worked as an engineer for a tech company, which allowed me more time at home with our kids, Josh and Lily. Our weekends were filled with soccer games, family barbecues, and the occasional night out. Life seemed perfect, but as they say, appearances can be deceiving. Little did I know, beneath the surface of our seemingly idyllic life, Emily was hiding a secret that would shatter everything we had built together. It all started on a seemingly typical Thursday afternoon. Emily had just returned from a business trip to Chicago, and I was in the garage, cleaning out her car. I liked to surprise her with little things like a freshly cleaned car or a favorite meal, just to show her I cared. As I was rummaging through the glove compartment, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold: a used condom. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe it belonged to someone else. But as the minutes ticked by, the unsettling realizations set in. There was no plausible explanation other than the one I dreaded. Clutching the evidence, I stormed into the house, my mind racing with a million thoughts. Emily was in the kitchen, casually unpacking her suitcase. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, but her expression quickly changed when she noticed the look on my face. "What's wrong, Kevin?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. I held up the condom, shaking with anger. "What the hell is this, Emily?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked genuinely shocked. Then, just as quickly, she composed herself. "Kevin, where did you find that?" "In your car's glove compartment," I snapped. "Care to explain?" Emily's expression shifted from shock to irritation. She rolled her eyes and let out an exasperated sigh. "Oh, for God's sake, Kevin. It's not what you think. That must have been left there by someone else. Maybe one of my colleagues borrowed the car during a trip or something." "Do you really expect me to believe that?" I demanded, my voice rising. "This isn't something you just overlook or forget about." She crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes at me. "Kevin, you're being ridiculous. I've been faithful to you. Do you honestly think I'd be stupid enough to leave something like that in my car if I were cheating?" Her defensiveness only fueled my suspicions. "Then who? Who borrowed your car, Emily? Give me a name." She hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before she quickly masked it. "I don't remember, okay? Maybe it was Jenna or Mike. I let them use the car when we were out of town last month. I can ask them." The more she spoke, the more my doubts grew. Her excuses were flimsy at best, and her evasiveness only made me more certain she was hiding something. But what could I do? I had no proof beyond the condom, and without a confession, I was stuck. I decided to drop the subject for the time being, but the seed of doubt had been planted. From that moment on, I started paying closer attention to Emily's behavior. I watched for any signs, any hints that might confirm my worst fears. Little did I know, the truth was far more devastating than I could have ever imagined. A few weeks passed, and though things seemed to return to normal on the surface, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Emily continued her routine of long hours and business trips, but now every late night and every out-of-town meeting made me suspicious. I became a detective in my own home, searching for clues and piecing together fragments of evidence. One Friday evening, I took Josh and Lily to a friend's house for a sleepover. Emily said she had a late meeting and would be home after us. When I returned home alone, the house was eerily quiet. I walked through the door, expecting to see Emily either working in the living room or fast asleep in bed. Instead, I was greeted by muffled sounds coming from our bedroom. My heart raced, anger and dread mixing into a toxic cocktail in my veins. I moved quietly, my feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floors. As I reached the top of the stairs, the sounds became clearer. Groans, moans, and the unmistakable rhythm of sex. I stood frozen outside our bedroom door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. I felt like I was in a nightmare, desperately wishing to wake up, but knowing this was my brutal reality. Summoning every ounce of courage, I flung the door open. There she was, Emily, tangled in the sheets with another man. They both looked up, eyes wide with shock. The man scrambled to cover himself, while Emily sat up, her face a mask of horror. "Kevin, I can explain," she stammered, but I didn't need to hear her excuses. Rage boiled over, and I lost all sense of reason. I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the baseball bat I kept by the closet. In a blind fury, I grabbed it and swung at the intruder. He yelped in pain as the bat connected with his shoulder, and he tumbled out of bed, clutching his arm. "Get the hell out of my house!" I roared, my voice barely recognizable. The man scrambled to his feet, grabbing his clothes as he bolted past me and down the stairs. I didn't care who he was or what his story might be. All I knew was that he had defiled my home, my marriage, my trust. Emily was still sitting on the bed, clutching the sheets to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Kevin, please," she begged. "I'm so sorry." I stood there, bat in hand, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, rage, heartbreak. I wanted to scream, to cry, to destroy everything in sight. Instead, I dropped the bat, feeling a sudden, crushing weight of exhaustion. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Why did you do this to us?" She sobbed, shaking her head. "I don't know, Kevin. I was lonely, stressed, and I made a terrible mistake. Please, you have to believe me, it didn't mean anything." But her words were hollow, offering no solace. The damage was done, and no amount of apologies could undo the pain she had caused. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there to weep alone. As I made my way downstairs, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Emily's betrayal had shattered the life we had built together, and I was left to pick up the pieces and figure out what to do next. I spent the night on the couch, unable to sleep. My mind kept replaying the scene over and over, each time more painful than the last. The house was still. The only sound was the occasional sniffle or sob from upstairs. I felt numb, like I was drifting through a haze of disbelief and fury. The next morning, Emily came down, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked at me with a mixture of regret and desperation. "Kevin, can we talk?" she asked softly. I stared at her for a moment, my emotions bubbling just below the surface. "Talk?" I echoed bitterly. "About what, Emily? About how you fucked some guy in our bed while our kids were out? About how you betrayed me?" She winced at my harsh words. But I didn't care. She deserved to feel every ounce of the pain she had inflicted on me. "I know what I did was unforgivable," she said, her voice trembling. "But please, Kevin, let me explain." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the couch. "Fine. Explain." She took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "It started a few months ago. I was feeling overwhelmed with work, the constant pressure to succeed, and the long hours away from home. I was stressed, lonely, and vulnerable. Then I met Mark. He was charming, attentive, and he made me feel important." My jaw clenched at the mention of his name. "Mark? So you even know his name? How sweet." Emily's eyes filled with tears again. "Kevin, please. I'm trying to be honest with you. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." I stood up, my anger surging again. "Didn't mean for it to happen? You brought him into our house, into our bed. You can't just brush this off as some accident." She reached out, but I pulled away. "I know, Kevin. I know I messed up. I should have talked to you, should have leaned on you instead of him. But I was weak, and I let it get out of hand." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I looked at her, seeing a mixture of guilt and fear. Part of me wanted to believe her, to forgive her and move on. But another part of me, a louder part, screamed that she didn't deserve forgiveness. "Emily, I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I said finally, my voice raw with emotion. "You broke something that can't be easily fixed." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, Kevin. But I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." I shook my head, feeling a pang of sadness amidst the anger. "You can't just fix this, Emily. You can't undo what you've done." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her, my own eyes stinging with tears. Despite everything, a part of me still loved her, still wanted to hold her and tell her everything would be okay. But I knew that wasn't possible. Not anymore. I need some time to think, I said, my voice barely audible. I need to figure out what to do next. Emily nodded, unable to speak through her tears. I turned and walked out of the house, needing to escape the suffocating weight of her betrayal. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there, not with the ghost of her infidelity haunting every corner. The following days were a blur. I avoided Emily as much as possible, staying late at work and finding any excuse not to go home. When I did see her, the tension was palpable. She tried to reach out to talk, but I shut her down every time. The pain was too fresh, the wound too raw. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I found myself at a local bar. It was a dingy place, the kind of dive where people went to forget their troubles. I sat at the counter, nursing a whiskey, my mind racing with thoughts of Emily and her betrayal. The more I drank, the angrier I became. I couldn't just let her get away with what she did. I needed to do something, to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. That's when the idea hit me. Revenge. It wasn't something I had ever considered before, but in my alcohol-fueled haze, it seemed like the perfect solution. I knew exactly where to start. The next day, I called in sick to work and started making my plans. First, I gathered as much information as I could about Mark, the man Emily had been sleeping with. It wasn't hard to find him. Emily had mentioned his full name during our confrontation, and a quick search online led me to his social media profiles. He was married too, with a wife and 2 young children. The thought of exposing his affair to his family filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction. But I wasn't going to stop there. I wanted to hit Emily where it hurt the most, her career. I knew she was up for a big promotion at work, and I also knew her company had a strict policy against workplace relationships. If I could prove she had been sleeping with a colleague, her career would be over. I started by sending an anonymous email to Mark's wife, detailing everything I knew about the affair. I included dates, times, and even photos I had taken of him leaving our house. It was cruel, but I didn't care. He deserved it. Next, I sent a similar email to Emily's boss, copying HR on the message. I framed it as a concerned employee who had discovered inappropriate behavior between 2 colleagues. I knew it would trigger an investigation, and I was confident Emily wouldn't be able to talk her way out of this one. As the days passed, I waited for the fallout. Emily became increasingly anxious, sensing that something was amiss but not knowing what. Then, one evening, she came home looking pale and shaken. "Kevin, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I raised an eyebrow, feigning ignorance. "About what?" She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "Someone reported my affair to HR. They're launching an investigation, and Mark, his wife, found out everything. She's leaving him." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Is that so? How unfortunate." Emily's eyes widened with realization. "It was you, wasn't it? You did this." I didn't bother denying it. "What did you expect, Emily? You thought you could betray me and get away with it? Actions have consequences." She stared at me, a mixture of anger and desperation in her eyes. "You're destroying my life, Kevin." I stood up, towering over her. "You destroyed mine first, Emily. This is just payback." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. She had hurt me in the worst possible way, and now she was feeling the consequences of her actions. Over the next few weeks, Emily's life unraveled. She was suspended from work pending the investigation, and the stress of it all took a visible toll on her. Mark's wife filed for divorce, and he lost custody of his kids. Our home became a battleground of silence and resentment, and I knew there was no coming back from this. As much as my revenge had satisfied a part of me, it also left me feeling hollow. The realization that my actions had caused so much pain didn't bring the closure I had hoped for. But it was too late to turn back now. The damage was done, and we were both left to pick up the pieces of our shattered lives. The tension in our house reached a boiling point. Every day was filled with silence, broken only by the occasional forced conversation about logistics and the kids. The atmosphere was suffocating, and I knew that something had to give. One evening, after putting Josh and Lily to bed, I decided it was time to have the conversation that would finally bring some closure. I found Emily in the living room, sitting on the couch and staring blankly at the TV. She looked exhausted, the stress of the investigation at work and the fallout from her affair etched into her features. I took a deep breath and sat down across from her. "Emily, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked up, her eyes weary. "What is it, Kevin?" I took another deep breath, trying to find the right words. "This isn't working. We can't keep living like this. The betrayal, the revenge, the constant tension, it's tearing us apart." She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know, Kevin. I know I hurt you, and I know things can never be the same. But I still love you. I still want to make things right." I shook my head, feeling a pang of sadness. "I don't think that's possible, Emily. The trust is gone, and without trust, there's nothing left to build on. I've been trying to convince myself that we can move past this, but we can't. Too much has happened." She started to cry, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I made a terrible mistake, Kevin. I was stupid and selfish, and I ruined everything. But I can't lose you. Please, we can go to counseling. We can try to fix this." I felt a lump in my throat, but I forced myself to stay strong. "Emily, I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if you're cheating on me again. I don't want to live in a house filled with resentment and anger. We need to move on, for our sake and for the kids' sake." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "What about the kids, Kevin? What about Josh and Lily? How are we going to explain this to them? We'll tell them the truth, in a way they can understand. We'll let them know that we both love them and that this isn't their fault. We'll work together to make this transition as smooth as possible for them." Emily wiped her tears, her face a mask of despair. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." I sighed, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "I know, Emily, but intentions don't change the reality of what happened. We both made mistakes, and now we have to deal with the consequences." She nodded, her expression defeated. "So what now?" "We need to start the process of separating," I said, my voice firm. "I'll find a place to stay for a while, and we'll figure out the logistics of splitting our assets and arranging custody for the kids." Emily nodded again, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make this as painless as possible." We sat there in silence for a few moments, the weight of our decision settling over us. It was a painful, heartbreaking moment, but it was also a necessary one. Our marriage was over, and there was no point in dragging it out any longer. As I stood up to leave, Emily reached out and grabbed my hand. "Kevin, I'm so sorry. I know I can't make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I regret it every single day." I looked down at her, feeling a surge of conflicting emotions. "I know, Emily. I know you do. But it's too late to change what happened. We have to move forward now. For our sake and for the kids." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Goodbye, Kevin." "Goodbye, Emily," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. I walked out of the living room, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now we had taken the first step towards healing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil. Emily and I agreed to file for an uncontested divorce, hoping to avoid a protracted court battle for the sake of the kids. Even so, the process was draining, both financially and emotionally. We each hired lawyers who facilitated the division of our assets and worked out a custody agreement for Josh and Lily. Our house, the home we had built together, was to be sold, and the proceeds split between us. It felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage, seeing the for sale sign go up in the front yard. We stood before the judge in a small, sterile courtroom. The formality of the setting only heightened the sense of finality. Emily looked fragile, her usual confident demeanor replaced with a visible sadness. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing that, despite everything, she was still the mother of my children and someone I had once loved deeply. The judge read through the terms of our agreement, asking us each to confirm our understanding and acceptance. We both nodded, our voices barely more than whispers. The judge then declared our marriage dissolved, his words echoing in the silent courtroom. As we left the courthouse, Emily and I exchanged a brief, awkward hug. It felt like the right thing to do, a small gesture of closure after everything we'd been through. "Take care, Kevin," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and sincerity. "You too, Emily," I replied. "Let's do our best for the kids." With the legalities behind us, the reality of our new lives began to set in. I found an apartment nearby, ensuring I could still be close to Josh and Lily. We explained the situation to them as gently as we could, emphasizing that both Mommy and Daddy loved them very much, and that none of this was their fault. Their reactions were a mix of confusion and sadness, and it broke my heart to see them hurting. Emily and I managed to maintain a civil relationship, coordinating our schedules and doing our best to provide a stable environment for the kids. We alternated weekends and shared holidays, creating new traditions to replace the old ones we had lost. It was awkward and difficult, but we were determined to make it work. Despite the challenges, there were moments of hope and healing. I threw myself into my work and found solace in the support of friends and family. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, focusing on my relationship with Josh and Lily, and finding new ways to be happy. Emily, too, seemed to be moving forward. She eventually found a new job, one that allowed her to be closer to home and more present in the kids' lives. We remained polite and cooperative, putting our past behind us for the sake of our family. The divorce had been a painful and traumatic experience, but it also taught me valuable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of self-care. I learned that, even in the face of betrayal and heartbreak, it was possible to find strength and move forward. As I stood in my new apartment, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of bittersweet relief. The journey had been long and painful, but I had come out the other side stronger and more determined to build a better future for myself and my children. With the divorce final and the dust beginning to settle, I embarked on the journey of rebuilding my life. At first, it was strange waking up in a new apartment, surrounded by unfamiliar walls and the absence of Emily's presence. But over time, the place began to feel like my own, a sanctuary where I could heal and start anew. Josh and Lily were my anchors through it all. Their laughter, their endless questions, their unfiltered joy. They reminded me every day of what truly mattered. We spent our weekends exploring parks, going to the movies, and just being together. I made a promise to myself to be there for them in ways I hadn't been before, to be more present, more engaged. Work became both a refuge and a source of pride. I threw myself into new projects, took on challenges that pushed me to grow, and found a renewed sense of purpose in my career. My colleagues, many of whom knew what I was going through, offered support and camaraderie that helped me through the darkest days. Emily and I maintained a cordial relationship for the sake of the kids. We coordinated schedules, attended school events together, and made sure Josh and Lily knew they were loved and supported by both of us. The anger and bitterness slowly gave way to a more pragmatic acceptance. We had both made mistakes, but we were determined to co-parent effectively and create a stable environment for our children. As time passed, I started to open myself up to new experiences and new people. I reconnected with old friends, joined a gym, and even signed up for a cooking class. These activities not only filled the void left by the divorce, but also helped me rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. One evening, while attending a friend's barbecue, I met Lisa. She was smart, funny, and had an energy about her that was infectious. We hit it off immediately, and as we talked, I realized how much I had missed having someone to share my life with. Our connection was easy and natural, and before long, we were seeing each other regularly. Lisa brought a lightness to my life that I hadn't felt in years. She embraced Josh and Lily with open arms, and they quickly grew to adore her. Our time together was filled with laughter, adventure, and a deep sense of companionship. With Lisa, I began to envision a future that was bright and hopeful. Reflecting on the journey I had been through, I realized how much I had learned about myself and about life. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but I had also discovered my own resilience and capacity for growth. The experience had taught me the importance of communication, trust, and self-worth. I had learned to prioritize my own happiness and well-being, and to never lose sight of what truly matters. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city that had become my new home, I felt a sense of peace. My life had taken an unexpected turn, but it had also led me to a place of newfound strength and clarity. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them, armed with the lessons of the past and the promise of a brighter future. For Josh, Lily, and myself, this was a new beginning, a chance to build a life filled with love, joy, and endless possibilities. And for that, I was profoundly grateful.